Hey, this is Learn Algebra Faster, and in this video we are going to discuss interpreting bar graphs. So let's say that you have a bar graph in front of you and you want to understand what it's trying to tell you. You're wanting to interpret the data that's shown and fully understand what's going on. Well, the good thing is that there are four key places to look on any bar graph, and when you identify those four key places, you will understand how to interpret bar graphs. So let's start with the very first part of the bar graph, and that is the title. So the title of a bar graph is kind of like a summary of what you're looking for. So in this case, for this bar graph that we're showing, the title is right here. So this is Votes for Favorite Movie in a Classroom. So just from the title, we know what we're counting. That would be the votes. And we know who is counting them. It's in a classroom, so we'll say that it's probably the students or it's whoever's in the classroom. Second, we look for the vertical axis. So the vertical axis means it's going up and down. So it's this axis right here. And what this shows us is how many we are counting. So as you can tell, we start all the way at 0 and we count up to 5. So the maximum of votes that we can count on this bar graph is 5, and the minimum is 0. And for any bar graph, this vertical axis is going to be the number or quantity of things that you're counting. The third part is the horizontal axis. So that is the axis that is going left to right. That is this right here. It's in the same place on every bar graph. I guess we should go ahead and label the vertical axis as number 2 and the horizontal axis is number 3. And this is where you get groups of things. You get the groups of what you're going to count. So in this case, we have A, B, and C. And those, if you go back to the title, those are the favorite movies that people are voting for. So all of these things work together. And so when you identify all four of these key areas, you can look at them together and you can interpret the bar graph. So in this case, we see A, B, C. What does that mean? We go back up here to the title. A, B, and C is the movie that is being voted for. And then finally, the fourth part of any bar graph that's important is the key. And that is right here. It's in a little box, and it shows that right here what we're counting. So the green bars, what do they actually represent? They represent the number of students. And so now we can understand completely that this bar graph is the number of votes for a favorite movie in a classroom. Who's doing the voting? The students are doing the voting. And now let's look at the actual graph, and we can see that 2 people voted for movie A, 4 people voted for movie B, and 1 person voted for movie C. So you can tell by judging the bars that movie B is the favorite movie. And another thing that's kind of cool about bar graphs is that you can actually sum all the data to find out the whole group size. So if 2 people voted for A, 4 people voted for B, and 1 person voted for C, then all we have to do is add these numbers, and we can find out that there are 7 kids in the classroom. So that's pretty cool. Every bar graph has all 4 of these key groups of information, and when you use them all together, you can interpret any bar graph. So let's move on and let's go to a different example. Let's find out some more things that you can do with bar graphs. In this example, we want to talk about reading bar graphs. So this is kind of like interpreting. So for reading bar graphs, we're going to actually look at the data and try to see what it tells us. So when you see bar graphs, oftentimes you can actually look at them and find trends, you can do comparisons, you can judge the scale, and I'll show you how to do all of that. So let's start at this bar graph on the left. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to look for the title. That's the average temperature by country and month. Okay, so we're looking at the average temperature of specific countries and specific months of the year. On the vertical axis, this one right here, you see that we're judging from 0 degrees all the way up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. On the horizontal axis, we're actually judging 3 groups of things right here, and I actually don't have that labeled really well, but what we're doing here is we are going to judge months, and we're going to see what we can come up with here. So on the horizontal axis of this specific chart, we are actually looking at months of the year. And I just made all this data up. This isn't scientific. It's just an illustration. So the months that we're actually measuring are January, June, and December. And then the fourth part of this graph to help us read it is the key, and that shows us that the green bars are for USA, the red bars are for Panama, and the blue bars are from Greenland. So as you look at these charts, January has measures for all 3 countries, June has measures for all 3 countries, and December has measures from all 3 countries. Now let's go back here and let's talk about trends. Sometimes bar graphs have data that's all over the place and there really is no trend. But this specific graph, I drew it to show trends in the data. So let's start with green. Let's start with the USA. So the first data is here, somewhere probably between 60 and 70. The second bar is almost to 80, and the third bar is somewhere between 80 and 90. So if you actually look, this data is slowly going uphill at a steady pace. And so the trend of the USA is that as the year goes on, it's actually growing. And like I said, this is just an illustration. This isn't real data. So now let's look at Panama and see if we can find a trend here. Well, in January, it's right about 90. In June, it's also right around 90. And in December, it's right around 90. So the trend here is that the average temperature stays about the same. So we would say it's kind of flat. Now let's look at Greenland. Greenland, the first amount of data is somewhere between 20 and 30. The second bar is right about 20, and the third bar is somewhere between 20 and 10. And so if you see the trend here, it is at a slow and steady decline. So when you look at data, not everything will show a trend, but keep your eye out for trends that are growing, like the USA data, trends that are declining, like the Greenland data, or maybe everything is staying flat, kind of like Panama in this discussion. All right, let's move to the next chart. Actually, quickly, let's discuss comparison. So, as you can see, a comparison on this first graph, the USA and Panama both have temperatures that are all probably 65 and higher, and so they have a high average temperature. But you can see Greenland's temperatures are here and lower. So if you had to make a comparison between the hotter countries or the cooler countries, you could compare the US and Panama are both considerably hotter than Greenland. So that's another thing you can keep your eye out for whenever you're comparing data on a bar graph. You can make comparisons between 2 different types. Now let's move over to the other graph here, and we'll talk about scale for a second. So this graph, we're gonna start off, see what the title is. It's apples by country. Then we're going to go to the vertical axis, and we're measuring 0 all the way to 10. On the horizontal axis, we are measuring countries again, so we have the same 3 countries. And then we look at the key that shows us that the green bars stand for the number of apples. So it looks like that the USA has 10 apples, Panama has 7 apples, and Greenland has 1 apple. Now, let's talk about scale. One thing that is really cool about bar graphs is that it's very easy to change the scale. Now, you would expect a country to have a lot more apples than just 10 plus 7 plus 1, so more than 18 apples. Scale has to do with how big the numbers are on the vertical axis. And right here, when you're reading bar graphs, it's really important to pay attention to the vertical axis because of scale. This chart gets way different if this 10 actually turned into 10,000, which would make this 5,000, and it would change even more if this number was 10 million and 5 million. So with very quick changes on the vertical axis, we can actually introduce different scale, different orders of magnitude of what you're counting. So when you think about interpreting or reading bar graphs, you're always looking for the 4 key places to find information. That's the title, the vertical axis, horizontal axis, and the key. And then when you look at the data, keep an eye out, because you may spot things like trends, comparison, and scale. You'll be able to see a lot whenever you start looking at the data. Thanks for watching this video. For more informational content and for more about bar graphs and lots of other stuff, go to learnalgebrafaster.com. Thanks.